back of the rim. Garnett on the slam. Oh, using Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry.
Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. At the age of 28 with under 10 years in the league, Paul George already has one of the best stories for an NBA player. After having gruesomely broken his leg during the summer of 2014 in a Team USA scrimmage, he somehow managed to not only recover but get even better as he's currently having the best season of his career. Back in 2013, he seemingly came out of nowhere to lead the Pacers to nearly defeating a Miami team that didn't seem to have a legitimate challenger in the East. And out of his entire 9-year career, he's only missed the All-Star game a total of 2 times when playing a majority of the season. But you don't even have to look at the success of his career to this point to wonder how he fell to 10th in the 2010 NBA draft. He had a great frame for a small forward, did awesome at the combine, and he took merely 2 seasons to start showing what type of player he was capable of being. With that in mind, today we move to find out how a future MVP candidate fell to 10th on the draft board and where all the players that were drafted in front of him are now. Paul George slid to the Indiana Pacers for many of the same reasons Kawhi fell to them at 15th just 1 year later. While his talent and potential were obvious, his college career didn't stack up to some of the guys taken before him, and the 2 years he spent there were just really quiet. He didn't win any awards, his teams never managed a winning record, and his stats just weren't anything eye-popping. If you look even further back to his high school days, the reason he didn't end up at a bigger college was because his body just hadn't matured into the typical frame of guys those schools usually look to recruit. He was actually committed to an even smaller program before Fresno State. So, just like Kawhi, he was one of those guys that you really had to study and believe in as a prospect, otherwise his true value and potential would go unnoticed. But still, there was the matter of the draft combine. He was 6'7", had a great wingspan, was knocking down his shots, showed great defensive ability, and his work ethic wasn't a secret to onlookers. So all things considered, he was fairly easy to spot as a prospect with loads of potential. At that point, it just depended on how teams felt about him and what they actually needed. And if they did happen to need a wing player, there were guys like Evan Turner who had much better performances at bigger programs while also having a more decorated trophy case. Oh, and before we get started, the 2010 draft is probably one of the best out of the retrospect videos done so far. As you'll come to see, even if a lot of these guys didn't become stars, they still made solid careers, and none of them are job hunting in 2019, which is rare for a draft this old. So at the number 1 spot, the Wizards selected the lightning fast point guard out of Kentucky, John Wall. You may have heard of him before. Thing is, hindsight is 2020. And while it may look okay to feel some type of way about this pick now, it's very hard to say this wasn't the correct choice at the time. The Wizards' lack of success with him throughout this decade has had a lot more to do with bad luck and just not filling out the roster around him. In just 1 year at Kentucky, he showed loads of potential to be a star player, and the Wizards were kind of desperate for some guidance into a new era. By the year 2013, around the same time Paul George had officially arrived, the Wizards were starting to look as if they'd had a bright future between Wall and Beal. But that duo never quite exploded the way we thought it could have due to injuries. I'd say 2017 was pretty much their peak when it looked as if their speed could have gave the Cavaliers problems in a potential playoff series. Today, the Wizards are basically back at the same level of uncertainty they started the decade with surrounding Wall. They owe him close to $40 million or more for the next 3 seasons, then he has a player option in 2023 for $46 million that I can't imagine he turned down for any reason. That's good for him and all, but with his freshly torn Achilles that'll likely cost him most if not all of next season, we're free to wonder what the plan is here. Given his heavy reliance on speed and athleticism throughout his career, with defenders heavily preferring him to shoot the ball, his ability to live up to that gargantuan contract is an extremely valid concern. The Wizards definitely had the right idea drafting him over George because he was star ready and he proved as much, but 9 years is plenty of time for great plans to go awry. Just ask the Wolves how splurging on Joe Smith turned out. The 76ers took Evan Turner with the 2nd pick, and this was actually before they'd officially cranked up the tank engine, back in the days of Iguodala. As stated earlier, Turner was just much more decorated throughout college, winning Player of the Year right before this draft, and he seemed like a very good piece to stick next to Iggy moving forward. However, this didn't turn out being a great place for him, as he didn't even start consistently or get second overall pick type shot attempts until his third season. And in that new role, he didn't even get more than a year and a half to develop, as by that time, the Sixers had decided to move in a totally different direction. They traded him to Indiana, which was actually seen as a big move when it happened because they were contending, but that didn't work out in any significant way. Actually, it seems as if it caused chemistry issues. Since then, he's basically spent his career being a role player, which he currently does for the Blazers. In hindsight, of course George would have been the better pick for Philly, but seeing as how they started Turner on the bench and then traded him as he was slowly improving on a horrible team, there's a good chance George would have suffered the same fate. In Indiana, George hadn't fully broken out until Danny Granger was out of the picture, so it could have been the same way with Iguodala, and again, he just might have got traded before that happened. However, if they would have actually given him minutes next to Iggy, the Sixers may look totally different today. The Nets took big man Derek Favor at 3, and my main memory of him was watching his rookie documentary with the trainer hyping him as a definite Rookie of the Year candidate. That didn't even come close to happening, and he was traded to Utah in the deal that brought the Nets Deron Williams. New Jersey really wasn't trying to spend time rebuilding. Despite the slow start to his career though, he actually became really solid around 2015 and 16 when he was averaging 16 points and 8 rebounds. He slowed down in 2017 after a bone contusion in his knee, and has been steady at around 12 and 7 as a starter for the Jazz. He's never been close to a superstar or anything, so it's surprising to see that he's been able to spend the entire decade with the Jazz since that trade. Either way, he's made a respectable career so far and has avoided the ugly bust label. The Nets missed out on Paul George, but by the looks of things, he would have probably just been traded as well very early on because Deron Williams was seen as a franchise changer at the time. Welcome back to the show, Minnesota, so happy to have you. And instead of taking Paul George at 4, this time they took Wesley Johnson. Johnson was an athletic forward that won Big East Player of the Year in his final college season. And while he was probably expected to play a significant role in helping Kevin Love bring the Wolves to relevance, his career in the league has basically boiled down to what he can do on defense. Of course, if you type in Wesley Johnson defense on YouTube, in return you're only gonna find the nastiest highlight of James Harden's career. But on offense, Johnson hasn't provided much other than a streaky 3-point shot on multiple teams, and now he plays for the Washington Wizards as they fade away through the end of this season. The Wolves could have sorely used Paul George as they were in great need of a wing player that could play both sides of the ball. Being able to start with Kevin Love would have given them 2 nice pieces to develop around, and Wolves fans would have probably been much happier today. They simply chose the wrong guy here, as with a lot of cases so far. And at number 5, welcome back Sacramento. And hey look, they didn't screw it up this time. Somehow DeMarcus Cousins slipped to 5, and this was one of the only draft picks the Kings would get right for the entire decade. Around 4 or 5 years later, he became regarded as the best big man in the NBA. The Kings could just never make the playoffs during his reign, again because they were consistently drafting the wrong player every single season after this. And they fired the one coach Cousins seemed to really enjoy, so great going there. As we all know, he ends up on the Warriors super team where he's charged with further ruining the league.
It's real funny!
I don't know though guys, I think the real bullet we dodged here was them not getting Brook Lopez. Now that would be a serious problem. Those of us that want an entertaining final series though are currently hoping for the off chance that he completely erupts in the playoffs and gets multiple people suspended. But other than that, he's already showed his value to the team. Guys go at him on defense sometimes and bait him into foul trouble, but while he's no Brook Lopez from deep, he's still a threat from behind there, and he's got to be guarded, which just spreads the floor out even further. His percentages this season don't reflect that, but guys still do not want him sitting wide open. Averaging 16 points and 8 rebounds in only 25 minutes a game with the Warriors, it's likely that teams will trust that he's healed well enough to throw him a nice contract this summer that lures him out of Golden State. Plus, even if Kevin Durant left and he did want to stay there, the Warriors would have to get really creative to make that work out financially. I don't doubt they can do that, by the way. Wow, speaking of Golden State, in 2010, they had the opportunity to select Paul George at 6, but instead went with big man Ekpe Udoh out of Baylor University. Of course, they were still running Monte Ellis with Curry around this time, meaning their greater need was a big man. So not only did the pick make sense back then, but it actually worked out better considering that if they had have taken George here, they may have chosen differently in the 2011 draft where they picked Klay Thompson, who turned out to be a much better pick for the future. Anyways, Udoh probably qualifies as the worst pick before George in this draft. He was immediately ruled out for 6 months after wrist surgery right after he was drafted, and the Warriors didn't even hang on to him long as he was dealt in the Bogut deal the very next season. Looking at his career, it's safe to say that at the center position, his defense is the only on-court attribute that's kept him around this long. He averages merely 4 points and 3 rebounds for his career, but also had some pretty good block totals. He's already fought his way back into the league as he fell to both the Turkish and Euro leagues for 2016 and 17 seasons where he won the championship both times, even winning the EuroLeague Final Four MVP. Today, he, quote, plays for the Jazz, but he's only been getting 5 minutes a game while averaging 2 points and a rebound, and with this being the last year on his deal, his time in the NBA may be wrapping up again. Or maybe it isn't. His teammates, specifically Donovan Mitchell, just rave about what an amazing locker room presence he is. They say that he's always the positive energy they seek, and when Mitchell comes out of games, he's often asking Udoh what he could be doing better and things of that nature. So his impact on the court may be scarce, but from what I've found, he still seems like a guy the team would want to keep around, at least for this specific group this year. And he's really the only guy on this list that isn't as visible on the court these days. The Detroit Pistons selected Greg Monroe next, who's had a wild ride in the last couple of seasons. His career got off to a strong start with Detroit where he peaked at around 16 points and 10 rebounds, but it's only been downhill since he left. Get this, he was the only other Piston aside from Grant Hill to tally 1,000 plus points and 800 plus rebounds in 2014. So according to what we know about the modern NBA and according to what Monroe said himself when he signed with the Raptors at the start of this season, it's simple. His playstyle has gone extinct right before our eyes, just like that. In 2010 when he was drafted, it wasn't imperative that big men knew how to shoot or guard the perimeter decently or to be that mobile around the paint in general. Andrew Bynum was still the starting center for a defending championship team at the time, and Kendrick Perkins being injured may have cost the Celtics a championship, so that tells you where the mindset still was back then. Of course, since that time, the Warriors have won 3 titles and changed basketball, meaning teams just aren't as keen on the skill set he was building a career off of in the first half of this decade. He's a back-to-the-basket guy who's not an elite rim protector and just is not that mobile. When he signed with the Raptors earlier this season, he said, quote, "We all know what everybody is reacting to and it is what it is. If a team dethrones the Warriors with a big, everyone is going to go out and get a big. It's basketball, the one sport where being tall is cool and they're trying to wash it out. It will come back around. Guys are adapting." In a 2016 video, I did mention that big guys weren't necessarily dying out because we had guys like Embiid, Porzingis, and Cousins, but of course the major difference is those guys make moves that are comparable to guards. Monroe has never shown that ability, and that's why he just recently made it back to the Celtics on a 10-day contract. It's possible Boston may keep him around just to have another big body to match the likes of Gasol or to throw at Embiid in the playoffs, but I guess we won't know that for a few more days. Detroit just missed out on Paul George, and they're quickly catching up to the Kings in terms of missed opportunities. Zach, I hate to keep doing this to you. The Clippers picked up Farouq Aminu at the 8th spot, and he was gone literally 1 season later. While his numbers have never been eye-popping at any point in his time in the league, he'll probably always have a slot on a roster as he's been a nice 3-and-D guy, especially since joining Portland. He shoots 35% from 3 this season, and at 6'9" with a great frame, he's probably their best perimeter defender. So he's not Paul George, never has been and never will be, but he's turned out to be a really good and consistent role player. And for the Clippers, this might be a part of their curse, as the 2010 draft was literally the season before they traded for Chris Paul. I don't know if he would have gotten the necessary touches to make a big 3 with Griffin and CP3, but they were literally always missing a great wing guy throughout the Lob City era. This one is tough. And at the 9th and final spot, where players usually go to die in these videos. Actually, this one is crazy. How about Gordon Hayward being drafted right before Paul George, as they'd both go on to suffer eerily similar and gruesome injuries set a few years apart? And to this point, that injury has basically changed the entire trajectory of his career. He improved steadily in Utah until he was an all-star, and then was one of the biggest catches of the 2017 free agent class when he signed with Boston. But through this season, he struggled mightily to find his way, and people are being really impatient. George definitely had a better return, but Hayward has been trying to make his way back on a team that's having a ridiculous time trying to figure out roles and how to divvy up shots, things like that. So trying to get your confidence and rhythm back on a team where you were supposed to be the second option but are now coming off the bench, you could see how that'd be tough. Of course, when George came back from his injury, he came back to a Pacers team that was more than happy to let him take all the shots if he needed, so that probably worked out better in terms of a rehab situation. Either way, Hayward's contract may really complicate things for a Boston team that has otherwise done a great job building into this era. He's owed $30 million every season for the next 3 years if he opts into his 2021 player option. But his production is gonna have to increase sooner than later if Boston is going to keep him in future plans. Either way, that wasn't a bad pick by the Jazz, as he was probably the third best player to go before George. And with the 10th pick, the Pacers selected their successor to Danny Granger, who was slowly on his way out, although nobody knew it quite yet. Larry Bird said that he was happy to draft George, who was an extremely hard worker and could play two positions. And as if you'd question a player's work ethic who remained a star after a gruesome leg injury, how many guys do you see windmilling in double overtime games with like 40 points while playing elite defense the whole night? All things considered, I'm happy with the version of PG we have today. He's currently dealing with a shoulder ailment that's basically tossed him out of MVP conversations, but before that popped up, he was doing some pretty incredible things this season. He'd even become the first option on a team with Russell Westbrook that looked like it was primed to go far into the playoffs, and this is in the Western Conference. So Thunder fans may be disappointed with the way this season is coming to a close, but I'm just happy that one of the brightest stars of this era didn't totally disappear after one of the worst injuries we'd ever seen. His story is still being written, and that's something we can all be thankful for. Finally, I'd like to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video, which is a service that allows you to create your own website, domain, or online store. Squarespace is an amazing tool if you've ever been interested in creating a website because you don't need any type of special skills or knowledge about code and all of the other things that may seem intimidating. I was running a 2K website many years ago, and it probably would have came out 100 times better if I was working with Squarespace. In particular, they have very professional templates for your site to get you started, so that you don't just have to come up with designs out of thin air, and I'd say that was probably the part I was struggling most with when I was creating my site. Being able to have some type of guidance with professional templates and then being able to add your own preference will definitely get you the desired results. So head over to squarespace.com through the links in the comment section and the description, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/dom2k to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.